All right, well, I'll get us started. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves for the most part, but I will just say a brief word. Ricky Campbell, who will be coming in here in just a moment, is part of the Mosaic community. I know some of you toured that yesterday, where they've had a tiny home community for a little over 2 years, 3 years. Oh, third year, okay. And they have 6 homes on their church property. And then, and Ricky is, he and his wife Meredith are kind of the mom and dad of the community is the best way to describe it. I don't know that they have official titles. Shepherds. And so we'll hear from him and his experience. And then Rose Larson, Pastor Rose Larson, is one of the pastors at Open Door in Maple Grove, and they have made the decision after some time and discernment, and you'll have 12 homes on your property. But Rose also was an intentional neighbor living in one of the tiny homes at Mosaic for 2.5 years. Yeah, so she has some fabulous perspective on that. So I'll stop talking and hand it over to Rose.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Bart. So I am so grateful to be with you here this morning. As Bart said, I am Rose, and I am just, this is a heartbeat of mine to share about Sacred Settlements, and being someone that lived in a community and got to experience the life-giving, joyful experience of being in this tiny home community at Mosaic in St. Paul. And so it is such a joy for me to share about this model. And our Church of the Open Door, where I'm a pastor at, they have been watching this process since the beginning. I got connected 7 years ago to the founder of Settled and have been a part of their outreach and building friendships with people that then became my neighbors in the community. And so this has been a journey, and Open Door has been so excited to watch and see the growing beauty, really, that comes from the Sacred Settlements. And so I'm going to share a couple of pictures for those who haven't been to the communities. So there's one in St. Paul, Mosaic, that I lived at and just moved out in May, and I miss it greatly. But it's better for me to be focusing on the planting of the Sacred Settlement at Open Door. And it's a very cool God provision story of how he raised up someone from Mosaic, that church, to live and move into my home as an intentional neighbor, which is what I'd been praying for. And so God is so awesome. But I'm going to talk a little bit about this model that we see playing out at Mosaic for 3 years, and at Prince of Peace is a small church in Roseville that also has a Sacred Settlement that they'll be celebrating their 3 years in a month, I believe. And then, of course, we're walking out this process with Open Door and hope to launch our community in about a year. And just within the next week, we'll be putting 6 of the 12 homes on the land. So I'd love, Randy, if you could put up the images, that'd be wonderful. Awesome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the model, and many of you know this, so if it's a repeat, please forgive me. I don't know what people know and don't know, but it is weird to see me up there too. Can we take that down now? And so, yeah, so this is our friend David. David and Laura I met David 7 years ago, the first day I went on outreach, and he was living in a tent in the middle of winter in the woods, and he had dug out this amazing piece of land, made his home out there. And so this is a celebration we had of the grand opening of Prince of Peace's Sacred Settlement in Roseville. And we all held candles, reflecting on and thinking about how Jesus is the light of the world, and that we then are called to be the light of the world as Jesus shines through us. And so you can go to the next slide, Randy. This is Mosaic Sacred Settlement. And so my home is the one on the far right. That is no longer my home, but I love. And there's 6 homes here. And this was a celebration, either our grand opening or 1-year celebration of our community. And you get to see the robustness of the community. This is a full community model. So it is not just about the people moving into the community, which is 2/3 people experiencing homelessness and now move into home and are no longer homeless, but have their own home. And it's 1/3 people who are intentional neighbors, like me, who just want to be a good neighbor. Don't want to fix anyone, don't want to change anybody, but want to just be someone that lives alongside people. And it's really an incarnational model, like we see it in Jesus' life, that Jesus, the Word, became flesh and dwelt among us, and that we get to dwell among people. We just do life next to people. And so you can go to the next slide. This model is really a beautiful model with 5 elements. So the first element is cultivated place. And so we cultivate the land. Oftentimes, churches are beautiful buildings and properties and are underutilized for how much space we have. And so we believe that the land and the buildings we have are a gift from God and are meant to be shared with those around us. And so we have gardens and we have home and we abide in the land. We inhabit the land and the space. And so it's such a gift to actually see the kind of the fruit, the harvest that we plant in our gardens is an example of the fruit that is growing within our own souls as we walk alongside people. And it's transformative not only for the people coming out of homelessness, but for all of us. And it's really for the sanctification of us, the bride of Christ, the church, and that it makes us all better and grows us, each one of us, in our own unique ways, and us as a church family. And so cultivated place, cultivating the land of the church. And we can go to the next slide for the second element. These are permanent homes. This isn't temporary housing. And so people get to come, people who have often been, I've heard it said on outreach, I've heard people describe what they're experiencing on the streets as a form of purgatory. Not to make a theological statement, but to make a statement of, it feels like we can never get out of this thing and we can never do the right thing, get traction to get out of this cycle of revolving doors. And so we want these to be permanent homes where people aren't cycling through, but people come and they experience community and family and love and grow deep roots and a sense of stability, which then brings healing as people wake up and their neighbor says to them, "I'm so glad to see you today." And that's a very different experience than what they've had throughout most of their lives. And that transforms all of us. And so these homes are made beautifully. They're on wheels to get above building code and then are zoned as a form of RV, and that the state of Minnesota recognizes as a permanent dwelling space and are blessing the church to have these sacred settlements on their land. And so we can go to the next slide for the third element, intentional neighbors. So this is my dear friend Laura, who comes to our Christmas and our Thanksgiving and birthday parties in my family, and her and David come all the time. And she is one of the most beautiful people, and I met her while she was living on the streets. But intentional neighbors, like I said, are people who've never been homeless or years ago were homeless and now have been just transformed and want to live alongside people. And so this is kind of a secret sauce of the community, that it's not just people who have experienced homelessness coming out and being among people who are struggling with some of the same things, some of the same traumas, but they're surrounded by people who have more of a sense of health and wellness in their life, a sense of stability, and know what a healthy family looks like, and can demonstrate that and really invite people in, kind of the heart of adoption of our Father. Come in, you are loved, you are seen. And so that's a sense of what intentional neighbors provide in the community. And then we can go to the next slide. So we have purposeful work. We all need to work. Even in the garden before the fall, we all were placed in a garden to cultivate and steward the land. And so we believe there's a sense of dignity that comes when we work. So everybody gets to work. There's workshops that are available. There's jobs around the sacred settlement and community. And then there's the supportive community that are many open doors for different forms of work. And one of our neighbors, Ryan, is working on building up his mechanic business again. He had been a mechanic, and then in experiencing what he experienced without a home, it was there's too much instability to actually work as a mechanic, and now he has a home. He has a place where he can do his mechanic business. So he just changed my oil last week, and I'm really grateful. And he has worked on my car 3 or 4 times, really saving me a lot of money, a lot of time and hassle. And so I'm so grateful for the different work opportunities that come up for our neighbors, that not just bless them with dignity and putting their hands and their heart to something, but also their supportive community and me personally. So I'm really grateful for that. And then we can go to the fifth element, the next one, supportive friends. This is our friend Alan. We all need friends. We all have people that we could call and say, I'm broken down on the side of the road. Can you please help? And that is what this community is. We surround each neighbor with 4 to 6 people, and we're kind of on the front end of working with an organization that has been doing this for 20 years and have a great training process. And we have this great partnership with them where they train up people from the church communities to come alongside people and sit at a table with that person and say, you are the CEO of your own life, and every CEO needs a board of directors to help them along their journey. And so we surround each neighbor with somebody, and this, or with a group of people, and they get to hear, what are your hopes and your dreams? What can we work through with you to move towards those hopes and dreams and wholeness? So some of our neighbors have gotten their driver's license, some are working on their different careers, some have gone back to college, and so we're seeing a lot of fruit in having a supportive community wrap their arms around people and walk life with them. And so you can go to the next slide, and this is the full community model. This is not a housing first model where we invite people to come and live in an apartment building or homes, but we don't surround them with people. Oftentimes, and I've heard story upon story of people getting into an apartment and then leaving not long after because they are stuck in the own traps that they've had set for them for maybe generations, maybe their whole life. And this is really wrapping our arms around the whole person. And we believe that the church is uniquely designed to walk alongside people in this way because we are filled with the Holy Spirit that does immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine. And we get creative imagination from that God of ours who lives within us, and that we have been gifted by God, church buildings and land to share with the most vulnerable people in our communities. And of course, our heart, that is after God's own heart, to love the poor and the marginalized and the oppressed, which we see all through Scripture. And now we get to say yes to this opportunity to share our buildings, our land, our hearts, our families with people. So this is the model, and I'm going to invite Ricky up, and I might share a couple of stories, but I will hand it over to Ricky.
Hello. Hey, good morning. So good to see you guys. Thanks for having us and me and my children. I'm solo dadding this weekend, so I appreciate your patience ahead of time, but it's been such a true gift to share a weekend with my kids. So my name is Ricky Campbell. My wife Meredith and I are shepherds at Sacred Settlement Mosaic. Shepherd is the term that we use through Settled to kind of identify the leaders of the day-to-day, but then also we have an internal shepherd, that's my wife, so that's day-to-day administrative tasks, making sure the train is on the tracks, and then we have an external shepherd, and that's myself, and I get the joy of sharing myself and my time with other churches and leaders, and then making sure to our supportive community, the broad support network that we have is staying up to speed with what's happening at Mosaic. So that's kind of my role there. And I'm a part-time pastor at the church at Mosaic Christian Community, and my pastoral duties is strictly Sacred Settlement related. I have done things here and there throughout the church, but that's kind of where I spend my time there. And so I wanted to share with you a little bit about just kind of life. The day-to-day life at a Sacred Settlement. I'll tell you first what a good day looks like. A good day at Sacred Settlement Mosaic, this was probably 3 or 4 months ago, and it was a beautiful summer day. We were outside, and the permanent homes lead, his name's Steve, and I were outside, and we were just chatting about a couple different things that were going on. And then one of our neighbors walks out, Ryan, she mentioned the mechanic, Ryan, and he comes out and he says, "You guys, come check this out." And we're like, okay. And he walks us across the street to a neighbor's house. And this neighbor, Alejandro, had this old Buick that was sitting in one of his back garages for years and years and would not start. And Alejandro's a good mechanic. He recognizes all the things that have to do with cars, but he needed some help. And so he invited Ryan into his life to work on this car. And Ryan sits down in the car, he turns on the key, and the car starts. And he's like, this is it right here. This is it. And I said, Ryan, that's so great. And he was so thrilled to be able to say, not only did this car not work, and now it does, but also I had the opportunity to come into somebody else's life, a neighbor's life, and invest time and resources into this vehicle. And now they celebrate that bond. And so while he's being super thrilled and showing us off this car, another one of our neighbors, Junior, walks out of his house, and he's walking across the lawn, and we can see him, and he starts yelling down the street. And I'm like, oh, what's going on? You know, and it was a neighbor 2 houses down who has, his kids have grown up in the neighborhood. We've seen their kids grow from little ones all the way to now graduating college. And they have such a bond that they're able to yell at each other down the block. And they were just trying to figure out when was Junior gonna come over to hack down some limbs on his tree. And they were just hollering, and I was like, you guys could do that closer, but okay, you know, but it was such a joy, because here we have 2 guys who previously were super self-independent, super resourceful, and had spent years and years on the street. Junior spent 10 years on the street. He's only 29, I believe. And so he had spent 10 years on the street before coming to Mosaic for 3 years. And then Ryan, who grew up on the north end of St. Paul, he has told us before, just a few weeks ago, he told us, this is the first time that I've had a home since I was 16. And it's the first time that I can call a place home. And here you have 2 guys who have spent years and years and years on the streets, who are finding purpose through their work, through their skill, through their resourcefulness. They're finding connection in the neighborhood, and our neighborhood is seeing the people there as an asset to the rest of the community. It's this great community building experience that we've seen. And I mean, it probably helped being a good day because the sun was shining, the skies were blue. But I'm an extrovert's extrovert, and so that relational thing, I was like, all right, we've got it. So that's a good day. I want to tell you a little bit about a bad day. We recently, over the last couple weeks, 2 of our neighbors have had just some communal infighting. They have what I would call is a classic older brother, younger brother sibling rivalry. And through that, we've had to navigate relational conflict. And that looks like one person got so upset that he started threatening taking out the other person's food from the communal fridge and throwing it out in the parking lot. And the other person had gotten to a place where he said, I don't even want to see that guy like when I walk through. And so the way that we navigate conflict is extremely important at Sacred Settlements, because it's bound to happen, whether you live in a family home, or whether you live in an apartment complex with other people living along, or whether you're in a suburban neighborhood. Anytime you start congregating people together, conflicts will arise. It's just the nature, unfortunately, of who we are and how we do things. And so navigating conflict and resolving it to a point is already super important. I don't think I need to reiterate that. But especially when you have people with deep trauma and experiences where authoritative figures can come in and step in, there's a lot of fight or flight that happens in there. So it's extremely important to navigate those very, very gently and humbly. And so what we did was we pulled one neighbor aside and we said, why don't you just come over to our house, we'll sit around the fire and we'll just talk. And we just sat there and we listened to him. And he just expressed concern after concern after concern of this other neighbor. And we just listened and nodded and repeated back, it sounds like you're saying this, is this correct? And he would affirm that. And we worked through it, and the goal of that meeting, the goal of that time, was to ensure that he left our house feeling heard. He wanted somebody to talk to, and he wanted to talk about all this conflict. And so we left that meeting so that he was feeling heard. And we said, okay, we're also going to meet with the other neighbor. Is that okay with you? And he said, yes, absolutely, please. And so a day later, we found the other neighbor and we invited him into one of the classrooms over at Mosaic, and we said, how's it going? Like, how are you doing? We found out that there's not just this relational conflict going on, but there's a lot of stuff under the surface. He's at this very high stress, anxiety point, and that's pouring into those communal relationships. And so we said, okay, how can we as a community come around and support you in addressing this stress and this anxiety? And he laid out a couple ways. And so we're taking steps to lay that out. And we started recognizing that in those conversations, that as goes with sibling rivalries, some things are perceived and some things are real. And so we worked really closely and really diligently to make sure that we identified what was perceived and what was real, and we worked through those together. And it could have, on a bad day, it could have erupted into a greater conflict. We could have had somebody just have their tipping point, and he could have been good on that thread of throwing somebody else's food out into the parking lot. But because of our relationship with them, because of our intentionality behind getting to know these folks, I really believe that in doing that, we were able to navigate this conflict. There is still a conflict. I'm not negating that whatsoever, and we're still working through it. I'm not negating that whatsoever. But because of those relationships that we've poured hours and hours and hours into, we were able to navigate the conversation and leave it in a place that says, okay, we all recognize there's an issue here. We're all working on what it looks like to navigate that issue and resolve that conflict. And I think that's just like a little snapshot of what it could be like at any other sacred settlement. You have to be able to navigate conflict and resolve it well and do it in a humble, gentle way where people are feeling heard, where they know that they are free, where they belong, and that they're capable of overcoming that little conflict. So much of the work and lifestyle at a sacred settlement is slow. It is really slow. And time is this, I was mentioned to the group that came and toured yesterday, I said time is this elusive goblin that we just can't seem to capture. And I think part of that is because when you have people who are exiting chronic homelessness, who have spent most of their waking hours overnight in protecting their stuff or their camp or whatever it might be, and sleeping during the day, having nowhere necessarily to be, that time is this loose construct that folks just aren't able to analyze and understand maybe in the same way that you or I do. And so things like giving a lot of margin in our lives, a lot of margin in our time so that we are present. That's part of the purpose of Intentional Neighbors, is having that intentional margin so that when you come in contact with somebody, you're not rushed. You're not, I gotta go with this other thing, can I be right back? It's making sure that you have that margin, because those relationships take time and they take a lot of presence, and it is so slow. And I think that's a lot like the kingdom of God. We don't see Jesus at all in Scripture in a rush. We see a lot of people begging for his attention, asking him to do huge things, and sometimes he withdraws. Sometimes he gets what we would look at as distracted to heal a person while somebody else is on their deathbed. And I think that I once heard a preacher say that that's the speed of love. It's about 3 miles an hour, which is about what the average human walks. And so I just wanted to let you have an understanding of that as you are considering and discerning what it could look like here, that there is that time. It's our greatest resource that we try to hold on to so tightly sometimes. We want our time to be our own. And I think that part of a sacred settlement and a lifestyle around a sacred settlement requires margin and us being okay with letting go of our time. So I'm sure that there are plenty of questions. We always get plenty of questions. And I want to make sure, because I understand that you've been through you are discerning, you're deep into that process. So probably a lot of what my value to you would be, is my best guess, is answering questions.
Always takes a moment.
Yeah.
When you're talking about navigating conflict, obviously it takes, I would think, some kind of training. Now you're a part-time pastor, and I assume that's part of your training as a pastor, but I don't know that most of the intentional neighbors would necessarily have that coming in, have that training. So how does that work?
Intentional neighbors coming into Sacred Settlements do have to go through a training. Part of the process that Rose went through and Kim and Jamal at our community went through was a training. We had a video series. It's from this website called homelessnesstraining.org. The guy's name is Ryan Dowd. He's a nationally known attorney, and he has developed this resource for us to lean into. And so there's a lot in there about understanding everything from mental illness and substance abuse to conflict resolution and de-escalation. And so that was part of the training that's required for intentional neighbors. And I would also say, being an intentional neighbor is not for everyone, right? I think somebody has to have a calling, really, a calling to live in community. And we have been so fortunate to see the people who have walked in as intentional neighbors own it in that way, that it is truly a calling in their life, and that through that calling, they are being the flesh and blood of Jesus. And most everyone has a good understanding of how to navigate relational aspects. And so one of the things that we've done is there's an assessment, a mental, emotional health assessment that intentional neighbors have to go through. And that helps them identify any blind spots, it helps them identify their health, all these different things that many of us have probably done. I think it's really important to do that once in a while for myself. And it's through that too, I think, where they can see, here's how I respond properly, or here's how I might need to work on myself. And they have been, I think in all of their life experiences, have had to navigate conflict in one way or a fashion, and then that training adds kind of the more nuanced approaches that come with people who exited chronic homelessness. And then I would also say, Rose mentioned with supportive friends, the open table model. And we are going to be bringing our intentional neighbors along in that as well. They're going to have their own table. They're going to be the CEO of their own life and address those hopes and dreams. Some of it could be spiritual, some of it could be practical, but they're going to have a good understanding too going forward of what that model looks like.
Most of the folks that are at Settle, are they individuals, or some are family units, or a father and a son, or a father and a daughter, or a daughter?
Yeah.
And also, I'm sure it's stabilizing at first, but is there also other mental health help? I hate to say graduate from that settlement. Would some people want to move to a different lifestyle? Or most of them are so happy to have a roof over their head, so to speak, and some of those comforts taken care of so they can work on their own stability. So. But 3 years is early for that, but the future would be that some people have reached sort of a plateau, and that's where they're comfortable, and that's where they will be. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a question.
So to your first one, the vast majority of homes across the two existing sacred settlements are single units with single individuals in them. We have at Mosaic one unit that for people who have exited chronic homelessness, they're a couple, Chrissy and Junior. And then our intentional neighbors, Kim and Jamal, are a couple. And then we have a third intentional neighbor who lives in what used to be Rose's home. Her name's Karen. And then over at Prince of Peace, the people who have exited chronic homelessness, there's 2 individuals. And then the intentional neighbors is a family of 3, a mom, a dad, and a 13, 14-year-old girl. And so that's what those have looked like. As far as the second question, I would say, yes, 3 years absolutely is a short snippet of time, no doubt about it. I think I'll say one thing first and then kind of get to the larger. We had an individual at Mosaic who lived there for just over 2 years, and he struggled. He struggled to be in that community, and part of it was because he was so used to living in the woods. And he'd been homeless since he was like 13, maybe 14 years old, very young. And so he had his people out there. And so extracting him from that community and putting him into another community was really, really difficult for him. And so after 2 years or so, and things were getting a little dicey and rocky with him, he came to us and he said, I don't want to be here anymore. Like, I just don't want to be here anymore. And we said, okay, God bless you in your next endeavor. And we want to make sure, from Meredith and I's perspective, and then our stewardship team that is kind of our version of the board that oversees it, excuse me, we always talk about, we want to make sure we've exhausted every option before seeing people away, whether that is eviction or realizing that there's some great need that has been. We want to exhaust every single option that we can, and he had exhausted most options, and then just came to us and said, "I don't want to be here anymore." To the bigger question, I would say that similar to us, each individual is on their own journey. And through that journey, we all have to identify where are our needs, where can we improve, and where can we transform. And we have to come to that conclusion ourselves. In his case, it was, there's just something that's just not adding up. I don't want to be here anymore. In other instances, we have two neighbors who are in two different sacred settlements who have recognized that they need more mental health support. And so they've worked with their supportive friends on seeing a therapist regularly. And through that, they're starting to understand themselves a little bit better. They're starting to understand some of the stuff under the surface, and they're using that in practical ways to transform. I don't necessarily think that there's going to be a collective aha moment, we're all better here now. I think each of us has to come to that in our own terms and in our own ways, and that's going to look very different in each person's life. But we want to make sure that we are putting those pieces in place so that when that individual aha moment comes, that those pieces are in place. So that's where the supportive friends and the open table are so important. That's where trained professionals are so important. We have over at Mosaic, we have a really good relationship with People Inc. And so we have a social worker who comes by once a month with the sole intent of just holding office hours. And if somebody wants to come and speak with her, they can. If they need to work on paperwork, they can do that as well. And I know over at Prince of Peace, they've got some pretty good resources for their neighbors as well.
Yep.
Thank you. I like what you said about the journey. It almost sounds like that individual was like a Jeremiah Johnson. My home is not here, but it's somewhere out there. Does homeless mean not living in a tent? Well, most of us think that's homeless, but there are many ways that people look at it, and he might be happier in that more rugged environment, so to speak.
Yeah, and while you're finding the next question, it's settled, we say that we're cultivating home in a homeless world. So it's not, so yes, absolutely there are people who are identified as homeless living on the streets or in the woods, but we are all, to Rose's earlier point about our garden home, we are all homeless in a way. And the idea is, what can we do as well as individuals, as a bunch, as a church, Big C church, what can we do to cultivate a home for everyone?
Can either of you speak to, as we've been in our discernment process, one of the concerns that's been raised is adequate support and volunteerism from the church community. And I know we've talked about shepherd role and supportive friends, but there's also other folks. And as we see engagement patterns kind of changing, about half of our congregation is 70 or older, and a lot of them are volunteers for other ministries. Can you just kind of talk to that a little bit?
Yeah. So it's funny. The line goes through my head from I forget what movie. If you build it, they will come. But there is this sense of when you say yes to a sacred settlement. We've experienced this at Mosaic and Prince of Peace, which Prince of Peace was really kind of in a similar place, I think, to where you were. I'm not sure, but they had the similar questions. And God has brought people. Mosaic is bursting out of their sanctuary. Prince of Peace, they haven't had a kids program for years, and they had to hire somebody to oversee their kids programming because families were coming, because people are drawn to the light of God. And this is a way that a church becomes a city on a hill. That's good news to everybody. And so people have just flocked to the churches that have said yes to this. We're experiencing that at Open Door as well. People are just drawn. New people are coming all the time. And we're not hearing that in the world, right? We're hearing people leaving the church, especially young people. And we're seeing people flock to the churches that are saying yes to this because it matters. It's making a difference in the world. And we know our faith makes a difference in the world. But people outside of the church, people who maybe have even lost hope in the church, are coming back. And people who are deeply involved in the church are saying, I want to be a part of that community because they're alive and they're making a difference in the world for the sake of our neighbors and for the sake of loving God. And so truly people do come because of who God is, and it's like magnetic. People are drawn to this kind of yes and this kind of step of faith and community. And so the supportive network is not just Oak Grove. It is many churches of many different denominations coming around and saying, I want to come to our monthly potluck. How do I get involved? And so it's a big invitation that's broader than just Oak Grove, and that's true of Mosaic, Prince of Peace, Open Door. This is a movement in the kingdom of God, in the bride of Christ, the church. And it's really empowering the body to be the body, to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And our awake brothers and sisters are like, yes, I want in. And so God truly does bring the people. And as you say yes to a sacred settlement, settled, and our church families, Open Door, Prince of Peace, Mosaic, wrap our arms around you, you become a part of a much broader community. And then the supporting churches around that are much broader than just those 3 supportive churches. So.
And I would just add, first from Mosaic's experience, and if you were with me yesterday, this is going to be a repeat. Mosaic is a much younger denomination, a lot of working class families, but even in the last 3 years, we've had people move into our neighborhood because they recognize the work that is being done, both in Sacred Settlement Mosaic, but then a few other things that Mosaic has going on. But they saw it and they said, whatever it is, whatever is going on, I want to be part of that. And so they didn't have the people who've moved in. There's 3 different family units that have moved in. Not a single one aligned with our denomination before they walked in our door. They didn't care too much about where we stood theologically. They said, whatever's going on there is good, and we want to be part of that. And then I would also say over at Prince of Peace, which is an aging Lutheran congregation, and Michael Stetzler, if you know him or you've heard him, he's been in newspaper articles saying this, so I'm not speaking out of school, but they're an aging Lutheran congregation, kind of a classic ELCA church, and he said, we're seeing younger people come into our congregation because they've seen the work that we're doing through the Sacred Settlement. And stepping back from a church perspective, people are good, and that movement is good. That also, of course, brings in giving, but that also brings in new perspectives and fresh life that I think all of us need and desire. And then just to underscore Rose's point as well, in a sacred settlement, it's not just a solo church doing this thing. There is a much broader network of people and churches that are already well involved in this movement and more than happy to lend a hand.
So I struggle sometimes with the idea that this is such a seemingly small impact, 3 people or 4 people, and the problem is so big. And yet I think it gives us an opportunity, so we know that one person. Well, now when we see all the other people on the corner and downtown, we can imagine that we could be friends with them and that they're not someone we don't recognize anymore. But that little glimpse we get of the few people we might have here, I think will probably change in more ways than we can imagine our ability to really see all the multitude of people. And in some way that's painful because there's our brother and sister and we're not helping them. But that's something just God can work in us, since we can't fix everything, but we can completely change our perspective. That's all.
Tangentially, are you familiar with International Justice Mission, IJM? So their whole purpose as an organization across the world is to end human trafficking. And so I recently heard their founder, his name's Gary Haugen, I recently heard him in an interview, and he said, as an organization, every day, the thing that makes them tick is they say, it's God's weight, it's our work, Jesus' way. And I thought, there it is, because we are incapable of helping every single person. We do have to trust that God is taking care of everyone and that he is bringing all things, he's restoring all things. That's the weight that God can carry. We can't. He has invited us to do some of the work and invited us to do it in Jesus' way. So God's weight, our work, Jesus' way.
Amen. And I love this question of the impact. And it's God's way is slower. He saved the universe by sending a baby, which is wild. And that slow work of God over time started with Mosaic, and that's 5 people coming out of homelessness. And then Prince of Peace, that's 2 people coming out of homelessness. That will be expanding soon to 3 more people coming out of homelessness at Prince of Peace. And then that's Open Door saying yes to 8 to 12 people coming out of homelessness. And then potentially it's Oak Grove saying yes and having 4 people come out. And so the multiplication of a sacred settlement, one church saying yes, inspires other churches to have a creative imagination to say yes. And that's what we keep saying at Open Door, because people are asking us, you have 30 acres, are you going to expand past 12? And we're like, well, we haven't thought that way. The way we think is we're making an impact on 8 or 12 people's lives, and so many more churches will be saying yes to this because they see it's possible. And so the ripple effect of that is beyond what we can even imagine. We're talking to churches around the country who are saying yes to this. I was in California last weekend with a church who wants to say yes to this process of discerning this. And they know 40 churches who are interested and have a similar heart to us. And next weekend, Gabrielle and Jamie are going to Seattle, and I was just in Indianapolis 6 months ago. So the ripple effect is giant to say yes to the 4 people. And when you boil it down to Jesus' way, like Ricky said, Jesus went after the one. And that one was enough. Just like we see in the parable in Matthew 18. He leaves the 99 to go after the one, and the celebration was so much more for the one. And that is God's heart, is individuals. He said yes to you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and you. And your life impacts so many people. The years you've lived, the wisdom you've gained, and then the many people you have touched throughout your lives, and the many more people you'll touch with the riches of wisdom you have, is beyond what we can imagine. And that's what we believe about each individual coming out of homelessness is we're seeing families reconciled, a mom getting reconciled with her 3 kids, and then how that impacts their community, those kids' community. They have a mom back in their life. And so I could talk on and on about the ripple effect of saying yes to 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people, and the impact that has in the world.
Since we've begun this conversation, every Presbytery meeting I've been to, which is a gathering of all the congregations in the Twin Cities area, I've had at least one, if not multiple people go, so you're the church thinking about that tiny home thing. And there are people watching Oak Grove, other Presbyterian churches in the Twin Cities watching Oak Grove right now to see what we do. and beginning to think, well, maybe if they do it, maybe we could too. Other questions?
While you're thinking of questions, I'll just share one more thing related to this is we reflect a lot on the story of the 12 spies going into the promised land, and the 2 spies come back with a positive report, and the 10 come back with a negative. And Jamie kind of leads a discernment process in this, and maybe you've heard this and have been a part of this conversation. But this is wild to think about how if we hear the good report and we acknowledge the giants in the land, we have been gifted by God to say yes, to take the land, to enter into the promised land and receive the good report and say, we see the giants in the land. Every church will have giants in their land. And we will have to take a step forward and be like David and take down the giants with God's power, which is an impossible, God is the God of impossible. And so we get to receive good report and say, we can defeat these giants. God is on our side. He's the God of provision. He's the God that goes after the one. And he's the God that provided for Moses and Abraham and Isaac. And he's the God that made a way. And so it is a declaration of faith, of who God is, not who we are, and not our resources, but who God is. And I think that just delights our Father's heart. And he is proud of his church family to even consider walking out this process.
I think most of us here really love this idea. From a practical standpoint, you've seen our space. How would it work in our space? Because we're really hemmed in on all sides by roads, railroad tracks. Do we have what it takes physically in area?
I had a great conversation about this yesterday with the folks who came over to Mosaic. Yeah, you definitely have streetscape and parking lot, and I recognize that one of the things that is challenging for your congregation is the parking lot and the number of people who come in here on a Sundays eats up most all of that. Here's what I would offer. Yes, you have what it takes. It would require, absolutely, and I just want to name this, it would require giving up parking spaces. And it would require becoming creative with what it looks like to park here, to commute here. It would require creativity. And I think you're, full capable of understanding the dynamic there. And so, yes, I think in looking, and this is my first visit to the property, so I did a quick drive through before I came storming in, and I'd seen aerials before, and I said, "Oh yeah, that's challenging because just depending on the number of homes and all of that, will eat up what is currently paved space and transform it into a beautiful green home space." And so yes, I would also just add, and that's something that you all have to discern. I'm not here to say that this is exactly how it's going to be done. I think when people get their minds together and start becoming creative, that God really honors that and enters into that process. And I'll say this, so at Mosaic, if you've been there, where the Sacred Settlement is, used to be this gnarly hill, overgrown, weeded. In fact, the back 40 of it was a neighborhood dumping ground. There were mattresses, gas cans, tires, all the things that people decided that they didn't want to put in a landfill. They decided to dump it on our property. And we have a joke that, so we're, for the Church of the Nazarene, we are an urban church because we're in the big city of St. Paul. And so all the other Nazarene churches in our district, which is 3 states, Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota, would send their college kids or teens, youth group for a mission into our property. And when we ran out of things for them to do, we would have them go clear that land because we were like, all right, well, and we had big dreams for this property, but we could not see how this gnarly hill, part of it was a dumping ground, part of it was just weeded and fallen trees and all of that. We just could not envision a tiny home community on that. And when we entered into the process and we said, yes, but where are the homes going to be? We started putting our creative caps on, and we started talking with Settled, and Brandon's the general contractor over there, and he said, I've got no problem grading land. And so what was an entirely, from the church's perspective, unusable property has been transformed into a home. I recognize there's a lot of differences between green space and overgrown hill with a parking lot. I recognize that, but just as another thought.
So when we've had conversations with Brandon and Settled, and as we've looked at our property, what seems to make the most sense preliminarily, it's a big word for me, is that just outside that way, in the parking lot space that is between the island and the building, on the other side of the railroad tracks, am I making sense to folks? We would close off the one entrance from Penn Avenue, the one closest to the church, and we would lose about 12 parking spaces, and make that green space to put houses from just beyond the railroad tracks to where the existing island is, where that rain garden is. We're not sure if we'd have to fill in that rain garden or not. We might not. That would be something in the design process if we say yes. We think we might be able to recover or create a couple of additional parking spaces by reconfiguring how the rest of the parking lot on that side of the railroad track is striped. So instead of diagonal parking, maybe it's not called vertical, it's called something else. But we've been looking at that a little bit. I had someone monitor our parking lot for 6 weeks in April and May. And we had anywhere from 3 to 17 open spots once worship started. So on some Sundays, if we lost 12 parking spots, we'd be fine. Other Sundays, parking would be at a premium, and so it would require a behavior change on our part. Pre-pandemic, a lot of folks parked at the funeral home. I think choir, right? Mostly choir. And so we've got 40 people in the choir, maybe that's 20 spots. So it would require us to change our behavior again. But I actually think if we could change our behavior like we did before, parking probably isn't an issue for us. And then we've also been having some very preliminary conversations with the apartment building also about parking.
Parking. Okay, so you talk about Sunday parking. What about funeral parking, where people have come in and said, I really want to go to the funeral, but where am I supposed to leave my car? And when we have all these older people passing, especially teachers, every teacher they ever worked with has showed up for the funeral. So I just think it's more than just Sunday parking.
Yes, and so the other conversation we had, again, going back to change of behavior for us, when that happened pre-pandemic, we had attendants in the parking lot to help people park, and we had a shuttle from the funeral home over to the church. So we would have to be more organized on a funeral to make sure we've got some folks that could either shuttle people or help point out parking, or again, do the overflow, the former tennis court at the apartment building, which there is access to from our parking lot. How many places do you think?
There's about 20 on that, and then they don't use a lot of their parking back there.
Yes, so we think we can probably, Penn Place Apartments, which is walking is about the same distance from the funeral home as it is from the apartment. And so there might be an additional 30 or more parking spots that we could use for those kind of events.
Maybe let us
Right. Yeah, we have a nice working relationship. They use our parking lot sometimes, and yeah.
I love this question. I think it's super important, and it feels like one of the giants in the land. It feels like, to go with that metaphor, this is an obstacle, a very real obstacle for this church community. And it's so important to name the very real obstacles. I love it. It's essential. So thank you for naming this. And it is this creative imagination of, I was even going to say shuttle before you said shuttle, Bart, where what if one of the neighbors who've moved out of homelessness, what if one of their jobs is to be a shuttle driver? We see this in Community First Village in Austin, Texas. There's someone that is paid to drive around and be a bus system down there. And that would give a sense of purpose and dignity to a neighbor. And it would be a joy and a delight to them, as well as anyone who gets to ride on that shuttle. And then, of course, you have people who, some people would need to park close, and that's so good. And then you have other people who are like, I get to walk a couple blocks or a block or two so that 4 people's lives are transformed. Like, sign me up. I will walk as far as it takes for me, you know? So you have, and there's no guilt or shame if you're someone that needs to park closer. That's so good. We as a family get to listen to people's needs and desires and respond to those. And some people's needs and desires here will be, I want more purpose in my life, so I would like to walk the extra block or two so that we can give up these parking spaces. And people, God will inspire people to do things like that, or inspire partnerships with the funeral home, with the apartment building to give these tennis courts. And again, the ripple effect of that is massive, because then you're touching people's lives beyond. They're hearing what you're doing and they want to partner with you in it. And maybe you'll even get supportive friends and intentional neighbors from the apartment building or from the funeral home. So yeah, that creative imagination. There are creative solutions to any giants that might be in the land.
One more question. All right, Bob, close us out.
I don't know if this is a question or a statement. As you know, we are somewhat of a mission church, going back over 180 years in that regard. One of the things that hasn't been addressed, several of the things that haven't been addressed, is what happens when we become the landlord. Because that's what we would become, is the landlord. What happens when the apartment complex next door to us says, no, we've got other plans for this land? What happens when the funeral home says, well, yes, you've used our parking spot, but you can't use it today because of whatever? And like I say, we are a mission church, and I think that one of the things I've been thinking about is, in going forward, and this goes back to our year of reading the Bible, are we going to be more like the Jesus, or are we going to be more like John the Baptist? What do? Do we become the light, or do we become, for lack of a better term, the mouthpiece? This is a good idea, but was this meant for us? Or are we merely here to help others get to that next step of addressing and bringing people in to help them in the micro, in the small numbers?
I love this question so much. Yeah, that's wonderful. And I wonder if to answer that, we just ask God. Would it be okay if we just pause in silence and just ask God, like, what do you want us to know about this? And surrender our, right, I can have an agenda, any of us can have our own wills and our own agenda, and we just want God's perspective. You know, we say, not my will, Lord, but your will be done. And so I don't know the answer to that question. Are you a John the Baptist, or are you the Jesus? I don't know, but God knows. And so how would it seem to just pause and ask God together and surrender our wills and ask for his perspective? Is that okay? Okay, let's just pause for just 30 seconds and say, God, not our will, but your will be done. Give us your imagination. what is your call for Oak Grove? Father, you are awesome, and we look to you. And we can't do anything apart from you. John 15 says that. Abide in the vine, and you will bear much fruit. Apart from the vine, we can do nothing. And we can't pretend to know your perspective, because your ways are higher than our ways and thoughts higher than our thoughts. But we want your vision for Oak Grove. And so we invite you to continue to bring confirmation and show this church family what you have for their land, their building, their church community in partnership with Settled. We surrender to you, and we ask for you to bring clarity and reveal the way. And we bless you, Lord. You are awesome. And Lord, we bless this community because they're exploring and being creative and looking to you and have such deep faith and such a mission heart. So we know they've followed you for 180 years, and they're going to continue to follow you. So bless them and continue to speak to them, Lord. In Jesus' name.
Can we give a thank you to Rose and Ricky?